In this video, looking at the unknown side of certain cards and effects, with more of a focus on zombies and Halloween themed monsters for this video, considering the time of year that this video is being uploaded. To start us off, let's take a look at Return of the Zombies. This is a normal trap card which has the effect where you can banish a zombie monster on the field and then special summon a zombie monster from the graveyard of the person who controlled it, in addition to having a graveyard effect where you can shuffle one of your banished zombie monsters back into your deck to set this card on the field, but then it's banished when it leaves the field. Now, the effect on this card is rather mediocre, because generally you don't want to banish zombie monsters for cost, as you like them to go to the graveyard instead of the banished pile, even if you do need to special summon another zombie monster from the graveyard. And using it as a removal for your opponent if you have Zombie World out is just a very mediocre removal option, because it gives your opponent a resource back. And there are much better removal cards like Ice Dragon's Prison which can do a similar thing. And the self-recursion ability would be decent if the first effect was just a little bit better, because being able to reset your zombie monsters back into your deck is just a good effect, especially for getting back copies of Mizuki to send to the graveyard later with stuff like Gozuki or Unizombie. However, one notable thing about this card is the fact that its artwork depicts over 20 different zombie monsters, and has got to be one of the largest amounts of references to other cards inside of one artwork in the game. In the top left corner, we can see the soul-absorbing bone tower, and right next to it you can see the tour bus from the underworld, which also has the soul-absorbing bone tower in its artwork, which shows that it's probably the exact same bus from the picture being taken for the artwork. In the left, coming out of the cliff, is a shadow ghoul, which is depicted in the anime as being able to go in and out of walls, so it's appropriate that it's peeking out of a crack in the cliffside. Below Shadow Ghoul is Dark Assailant coming out of the graveyard. Right next to him is Zombie Master, basically being depicted in its artwork of raising reborn zombie. Although the picture here seems to be slightly after the events of Zombie Master, but not too much after, as it seems Reborn Zombie is just a little bit more out of the graveyard than shown in the original card. Directly to the right of them is Temple of Skulls, which seems to be a lot smaller than you might think it is based on its artwork, which makes it seem like it's actually a huge temple, but I guess it's more of a small-sized hut temple. And as a small little side note, the Temple of Skulls itself has an interesting effect in Duelist of Roses, where it's basically an Imperial Order, a floodgate in all spell cards. Although in the normal TCG, it's just a level 4 vanilla monster with pretty subpar stats. However, since it was a full floodgate in one of the video games, it could be appropriate why it might be featured here randomly when it doesn't really fit the aesthetic of everything else. In the Blood River, you can see the sea monster Thesis, which is probably one of the more modern zombie monsters that will appear in this artwork, coming out in 2017, and was infamously hyped up as being one of the best monsters of the year by Konami. And if we zoom into the middle of the map, we can see Berserk Dragon either coming out of the ground or being buried in the ground, as you can only see his head and part of his left wing. To the left of Berserk Dragon is Plague Spider Zombie coming out of the ground, but since it's so small you have to really zoom in order to even see it, so it's kind of hard to tell what it is. But it's a pretty good guess that it's probably Plague Spider Zombie. To the right of Plague Spider Zombie is something that looks like Doom Kaiser Dragon, although I'm not 100% sure on this, as Doom Kaiser could also be depicted in the middle with its core glowing with a whole bunch of electricity coming out of it, although it's also really hard to tell what monster is underneath it. So I'm just going to guess that one of these two is probably Doom Kaiser Dragon because they both kind of fit the description. Next up we have Despair from the Dark, which seems to be depicted from the back angle, and based on the way Despair the Dark is hunching over in its artwork, this might actually just be the picture directly from its artwork, just from a different angle. And next to it we have the Dark Spirit of the Silent. In the front we have 3 different bone mouses, with next to them being Goblin Zombie front and center. Probably the biggest zombie art-wise in this drawing, and the easiest one to recognize seeing as it was a staple of early Yu-Gi-Oh! Then to the right of it we have Glow Bloom, another more recent addition to the zombie lineup, which was released in 2018, a year after the sea monster of Thesis. If we zoom in at the bottom left, we can see the hand and shovel from Foolish Burial in front of a gravestone, depicting its TCG artwork. If we zoom in above the Temple of Skulls, we have Zombie Mammoth coming out of the ground. All the way in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, we have Violet Crystal, which is an early zombie monster equip card that was released alongside all the other equip cards that were meant for only one specific type of monster, and boosted their attack and defense by 300 points. In the top right-hand corner behind the trees, if you zoom in, we can see Zoma the Spirit, a trap monster that becomes a zombie-type monster when it's on the field, and is a staple of the speed duel format. In the bottom left, you can see the back side of the 3-legged zombie, or Unizombie. It could be either or, since Unizombie is just a retrained version of the vanilla 3-legged zombie. In the front left, underneath one of the bone mouses, and to the right of the Violet Crystal, we have the Mummy from Call of the Mummy, a continuous spell card that lets you cheat out zombies from your hand. If we zoom in on one of the skulls next to the mummy, we can see a skull with a really large fang, which a lot of people online assume is the skull of Zombie Tiger. And finally, the entire scene itself is an obvious reference to the card Zombie World, as it seems the entire setting is directly lifted from the Zombie World art. As you can see the trees and the Red River from the Zombie World all inside the artwork of Return of the Zombies as well. Which could just mean the Return of the Zombies is just another screenshot of Zombie World, as Zombie World itself has a lot of zombie references in it, but not as many as Return of the Zombies. Next, let's go over the Ghostricks. The Ghostricks are an archetype that were basically created around the theme of Halloween monsters. And because of this, a lot of them are based off of Halloween-themed costumes and traditions, as depicted by a lot of their card artworks. If you look at Ghost Trick or Treat, it's depicting the tradition of trick-or-treating, where children go around dressed up in costumes with candy buckets, asking for candy from strangers, and you can see Ghost Trick Succubus and Ghost Trick Angel of Mischief with pumpkin buckets full of candy. Ghost Trick Night depicts 2 of the level 1 Ghost Trick monsters getting scared in a haunted house by some of the other Ghost Trick monsters. Ghost Trick Renovation could reasonably be surmised to be the card in which they're setting up a haunted house. And the field spell card Ghost Trick Mansion could be where all this is taking place, with Ghost Trick Scare and Ghost Trick Go Round depicting various events happening within the haunted house by the various Ghost Trick monsters. There's also Ghost Trick Museum, which could be a reference to a haunted museum for a different theme for a haunted house. Ghost Trick Parade depicting a Halloween-themed parade, as well as Ghost Trick Festival being a continuation of it. And then, of course, a lot of the Ghost Tricks themselves are just references to very popular Halloween costumes. Ghost Trick Spectre is an obvious reference to a bedsheet ghost costume. Ghost Trick Witch is a character in a witch costume. Ghost Trick Nekomusume is a girl in a cat costume. Ghost Trick Lanterns seem to be more supernatural as an actual creature embodying a jack-o'-lantern, a popular Halloween decoration. Ghost Trick Mummy dressed as the classic toilet paper mummy, Ghost Trick Alucard as a vampire, and Ghost Trick Succubus is supposed to be a succubus, although I'm not sure how popular it is as a Halloween costume. Then there's also a lot of Ghost Trick monsters that actually just look like monsters, rather than being references to popular costumes, although I guess they are also costumes too. There's Ghost Trick Ghoul looking like an actual zombie, Ghost Trick Jack Frost being a living snowman randomly, Ghost Trick Mary being a ghost stuck in a mirror, Ghost Trick Werewolf being an actual werewolf, and Ghost Trick Doulahan actually missing its head, carrying it in its arms. Now, I'm sure many people were expecting to see Ghostricks appear in this video, seeing as the entire archetype was basically created as a reference to Halloween and all the activities surrounding it. And to end off this video, let's go over some vampire cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always had a series of vampire monsters, and it wasn't really codified into an archetype of its own until 2013, where Konami had to go back and retroactively change some old cards that had vampire in their name, because they didn't want them to share vampire support. So cards like Vampire Koala had their names changed to Vampiric Koala. And pretty much all vampire cards are references to Dracula, one of the most famous pieces of vampire literature. Vampire Voivode is directly based on Dracula, as the word Voivode is a title for a military leader in the Middle Ages from certain places, which was the title held by Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, the main character Dracula is based on. There's also an upgraded version of Vampire Voivode called the Vampire Zombie, which is a rank 8 monster that is probably one of the better vampire cards of the game, as it sees play as a generic rank 8 boss monster, since it has the ability to mill the top 4 cards of both players' decks, and then special summons a monster that was milled by the effect from either player's graveyard. Now, despite its name not really sounding like an upgraded version, its Japanese name is basically True Blood Prince, which certainly sounds more like the vampire boss monster than just the zombie vampire. Crimson Knight Vampire Bram, a rank 5 vampire, is a reference to Bram Stoker, who's the author of Dracula. Then there's the rank 6 vampire, Damphir Vampire Sheridan, whose name Sheridan is a reference to Sheridan Le Fanu, who's the author of the short story Carmilla, a very famous vampire story about a female vampire which predates Dracula by 26 years, and was most likely part of the inspiration for the story of Dracula, as the story of Dracula references events that happened in Carmilla. And speaking of Carmilla, let's go over Vampire Fräulein. This is a level 5 zombie which can special summon itself from your hand in defense position if a monster declares an attack, and has the effect where, if a zombie monster battles, you can pay up to 3,000 life points to increase the attack and defense of your zombie monster by the amount of life points paid. And also, if she destroys a monster by battle, she gets to special summon them near the end of the battle phase. So it's a pretty decent zombie battle support card because its effect is once per battle and not once per turn. And it can special summon itself from the hand and offers its own form of battle protection because its effect works on itself. It's one of the few vampire cards that sees play in other zombie decks besides just pure vampire decks. Now, the card itself is a female vampire with a whole bunch of vampire familiars flying around, which is a level 1 vampire monster that can search out vampire monsters from your deck, and is easily the most referenced vampire card in the game, appearing in 10 different card artworks. If you also notice the shadow of Vampire Fräulein, you can see the shadow of the umbrella she's holding, but not the shadow of herself, which is a reference to vampire literature and how they don't cast shadows or have reflections. And there's also a little story that's told with Vampire Fräulein. where in the trap card Vampire Awakening, you can see Fräulein waking up in the bed with a whole bunch of vampire familiars around her. Then, in Blackout Curtain, you can see the storyline continue as she's waking up and presumably discovering her newfound powers, as you can see her wings taking form. The word Fräulein is a German word commonly used for unmarried women, which could be a reference to how vampires in literature prefer to hunt unmarried women as their targets, to put it lightly. Additionally, this card is also most likely based on Carmilla, since it's a female vampire that was given so much more attention than all the other vampires in different artwork, and because its attack and defense equaled 2600. And the novel Carmilla came out 26 years before Dracula, which is an interesting way to reference these two stories. Alright, and that's it for this episode of The Unknown Side of Yu-Gi-Oh! The other vampire stuff was just references to old English titles and are just interesting to talk about. If you have any ideas for future themes just like this one, or know of any other interesting cards to talk about, please let us know about them down in the comments below.